Rick introduced us and said that we are a real estate economic development and public policy consulting firm, which is in fact true. We get engaged by a real diversity of clients at the very early stages of projects and policy initiatives that aim to transform communities and therefore require the collaboration of the public sector, the private sector, civic activists like you, and nonprofit institutions. And we do that in a variety of different contexts, mostly in this country and around the world. Personally, I run a practice that's focused on ensuring the sustainable operations of public open space on both public land and private land. And I'm very proud that our efforts have resulted not just in plans that sit on people's shelves, but on built parks and open spaces that people are enjoying for the reasons that Sophie talked to you about all over the world. All of these parks and open spaces, as Sophie showed you, generate a variety of value to community. And I will stipulate that the highest value that open space can create is the joy that brings people who exist in that space. Sadly, joy is very hard to monetize, and therefore a very difficult basis on which to establish why you should invest in open space. So we as a firm, working with partners like Sophie, have embarked on the business of telling stories about other kinds of values that parks and open space create and how that value can be captured. Rick used that term. That's the jargon of what we do, value capture. So by creating more healthy communities, can we monetize? Can we credibly assess how much healthier a community is and therefore attach to that value through healthcare, through insurance schemes or the like? More plausibly and more frequently, we look at more conventional measures of economic performance, like what's the adjacent real estate doing? Are we attracting new employers and employees? Do we have tourists coming to spend money in our community? And all those ways of counting economic value have been credibly estimated by our firm and firms like ours around the country and around the world to make the case for investment in open space. Conventionally, you hear, I think Sophie showed you a picture of Millennium Park in her presentation. Millennium Park has driven residential development and the popularity of residential living in downtown Chicago for years. So downtown Chicago is absorbing residential units faster, significantly faster than other parts of the city. Likewise, in Houston, the building Discovery Green resulted in over $1 billion of new commercial real estate development. In Bryant Park, we see higher office rents immediately adjacent to Bryant Park than a block away. The High Line has attracted enormous numbers of visitors. Those are all pretty conventional measures of economic value. More interestingly, Brooklyn Bridge Park, which was one of the first 3 parks that I had the privilege of working on, and the park that my son grew up in, has really anchored a new tech district. It turned an adjacent area that was underutilized historic properties and catalyzed the redevelopment and reinvestment in those properties as one of this country's most important tech districts, the Brooklyn Tech Triangle and Dumbo. And in Pittsburgh, on the lower right on the slide, we have an example of investment by the nonprofit institutional community in a park that was critically important to a historically Black community, and where after investment in the park, we saw a premium in home values, therefore creating wealth for moderate income people without displacement. So while the population of Pittsburgh and the Black population of Pittsburgh was dropping, it increased in this neighborhood, partly as a consequence, I think, of investment in open space. So value capture, that jargon term. The value of open space is captured in the first instance by the private sector. It's captured because they can attract higher value tenants, and therefore the rents rise, vacancy rates decline, they lease property up faster, and in for sale environments like single-family home neighborhoods, you see higher sales prices and property values as a result. Because that private benefit has been created, the public sector can attach to that benefit in order to pay for the parks and to pay for other public goods, affordable housing, schools, and the like. It can do that because tax revenues increase, and in some cases, the public sector chooses to program the open space and earn money through parking or events or food and beverage. How much value gets created and how you count it is very much a function of the kind of open space that's created, what the built context around it is like, and what local law, regulation, and customs suggest is possible. So these two pie charts are from some work we did for the city of Dallas in support of a referendum that has allowed significant new investment in the park system in Dallas. And on the left, you're looking at our estimate of the value of the Dallas park system in terms of the drivers of value. Now, it always matters what you count. So what the city of Dallas asked us to count was the impact of parks and open space on real estate values, on tourism, and on the environment. Had we been asked to count health benefits or public safety benefits, the pie chart would look different. So one, what are you being asked to count and why? And then on the right, we look at the kinds of parks that make up the Dallas park system and which of them drive this amount of value. And if you're trying to crosswalk between the pie chart on the right and the pie chart on the left, you start to draw some conclusions that would be correct. That chart, unique assets, that green blob, unique assets, that's the zoo, and that's Fair Park. Fair Park is where the State Fair of Texas is held. A lot of tourism benefit, a lot of benefit from unique assets. A lot of the value of the Dallas park system is associated with State Fair. You're also looking at the real estate, and you're looking at downtown gems and neighborhood parks and going, yes, a lot of the real estate value, a lot of the economic value attributable to Dallas parks is in fact attributable to a small number of very beautiful, very highly programmed parks in downtown because Dallas is not particularly dense. And so all those little neighborhood parks that are critical for joy, for equity, are not generating a lot of economic value because they're in single-family home neighborhoods. So this business of what do you count, what's driving the economic value, where are the parks, very important for understanding how you're going to make the case for POPs and parts here in West Hollywood. The last part of that sentence, local norms, very often government or the market will not allow you to capture value that you've created. So we've been working to support a new waterfront park in Seattle for the last decade. The state of Washington has made it essentially impossible for cities to capture value in order to pay for public goods that are important to those cities. This is true in red states all over the country at this point too. So as we looked, we have, by simply announcing that the park is going to be built, seen more than $2 billion in real estate development in downtown Seattle, none of which has been capturable by the advocates for the park. And in fact, the only source of value that we can capture for operating benefit of the park is parking, which is counterintuitive and exactly what you don't want to do. You have the advantage of being able to think about these things before you get going. We have examples from around the country of people who have successfully and not so successfully attempted what you're trying to do, which is to build a network of POPs and parts that hold together as something that creates value for this community. In San Francisco, many of you have probably seen the San Francisco parklets, which are in fact publicly owned space that has shared public and private uses, but in a lot of ways function like POPs. And then on the right, I think one of the more interesting examples of these kinds of networks is Philadelphia's University District, which is the highest performing real estate in the city of Philadelphia. It is the market segment that's responsible for all of Philadelphia's economic growth, and where all the new development has really gotten branded by a network of rooftop spaces. And they're all different. They serve different functions, but they cohere as a whole experience of the University District. So you see here a wild experience, a very manicured botanic garden type of experience, and a space that was really designed for events. They all hold together in this one area. Ultimately, and I look forward to hearing from the other design professionals today about what they imagine for West Hollywood and hearing what you imagine for West Hollywood, you could start to think of this network of POPs and parts that you're building as an urban trail, as a set of nodes of activity, of respite, that variety of experience that Sophie was talking about, connected and branded as a single place, a trail, if you will. Now, we know that urban trails create some of the greatest economic value of any kind of public open space there is. That's because they're relatively inexpensive to build compared to a signature park. They're relatively inexpensive to maintain. And because they're linear, and you're going to do this on commercial corridors in the city, they touch a lot of real estate. So you're getting a lot of real estate value bang for the buck. In Dallas, for instance, the Katy Trail, which runs through primarily residential neighborhoods, but also some mixed use, is generating a 50-to-1 return, private return on public investment. And it's doing so because the owners, the private owners of property along these urban trails are seeing something on the order of a third in premium, in real estate value premium, compared to other similarly situated properties in the same city. So the first images of the Beltline in Atlanta. Atlanta's doing very well as a city. So you're seeing something like 35% growth in rents. Along the Beltline, you're seeing 70% increase in rent. In Indianapolis, a premium of about 37%, again in Boston. And I could point you to these urban greenways and trails all over the country where that kind of increment in real estate value and rents achieved in lease-up holds constant. So what would that mean here? So if you saw about a third premium in rents here, is that plausible? So what this chart is looking at is the median rents in major commercial markets in the county, comparing them to the top rents in the county and looking at the spread. Because if I say to a real estate owner, you're going to see a 30% premium, and I can't demonstrate that that's plausible, he's going to laugh me out of the room. Perfectly plausible. I think that kind of increment in commercial and mixed-use value in West Hollywood, I think is very achievable. And as you start to advance a network of POPs and parts, you should not tolerate pushback from the real estate owner community because they're going to see this kind of increment in value, which will then allow you to build out the network and achieve the benefits. Now, that doesn't mean this is all easy and that we can wave a magic wand. As Rick suggested at the beginning, the early experience, certainly in New York City, of POPs has not been entirely successful. It will perhaps not surprise you to know that the first images of a Trump property, and that, in fact, is not the most egregious closure of a POPs in a Trump property in New York. The second is more typical of what we got in New York from the zoning ordinance in the 70s and 80s, spaces that are technically public but just really don't feel welcoming. And then spaces in other parts of the world that, because they're privately owned, become over-securitized and don't feel welcoming. But I think there are just as many spaces in cities that work brilliantly. So when I started working in Charlotte on a public park in Charlotte, Charlotte already had in its downtown core this network of extraordinary privately owned public spaces, really characterizes uptown Charlotte. And that's a function of the commitment of Charlotte's corporate community to running these spaces so that they're genuinely public, to engaging with the social issues that occur in public spaces, and to partnering with a civic organization that helps them manage these spaces. Frankly, I think the real challenge that you're going to have in West Hollywood is the fact that these privately owned spaces are going to be developed and advanced at the instance of real estate developers responding to market cues over time. You don't have the advantage of public investment saying, we're going to build the trail all at once, and here are the various nodes. You're going to have to wait for the market to do it for you, and figuring out how that coheres as a single place will, I think, be the interesting challenge. So you look at an image like the upper left, that's the riverfront trail that's being built out in Pittsburgh this same way, where riverfront development requires public access. And so you get a beautiful space like this one, but what they're not showing you, that you have to walk around the next building because that lot hasn't been built out yet. And so, in fact, the image on the lower left of the Williamsburg waterfront, which was built out this way, as a set of the market builds each space when it gets to it, can be confusing. So we've been working in St. Paul on a governance response to that delegates authority for advancement of the trail network from the private landowners who remain private landowners to a new public not-for-profit. On the lower right, we advanced a programming solution where rather than trying to do physical design, we had consistent programming across a spectrum of private landowners. So you begin to think of, and in a very creative city like this one, creative approaches to trying to make the sum look bigger, the whole look bigger than the sum of the parts as the parts are being added. In conclusion, I think it's a great idea. And I think that the presence of people like you on a Saturday morning and your commitment to the idea suggests that you are well positioned to see the advantages, economic and joyful, that this network could bring off.